Those were air raid sirens a short time ago in Tel Aviv after Iran launched more missiles at Israel tonight. The latest just a few moments ago. People there being urged to take shelter. Among them, CNN's Jeremy Diamond, who joins us now. So, what are you hearing from Israeli authorities about their opinion on this deal? And is it clear how, how the prime minister, and again, I'm hearing more air raid sirens, so if you gotta go, you gotta go. But what are you hearing from Israeli officials?
Yeah, that's right, Anderson. You can see actually behind me one of those cluster munitions coming in as the air raid sirens are now sounding here in Tel Aviv. We're going to go to shelter, and you can stick with us as we move. But this is the fourth time now that we have had air raids in Israel since President Trump released that tweet announcing this ceasefire agreement between Iran and the United States. And in fact, this siren is the second one we've seen since the Pakistani prime minister said that the ceasefire had gone into immediate effect. So presumably, if the Pakistani prime minister is to be believed, then the ceasefire is already in effect, and what we are witnessing right now are violations of that ceasefire agreement by Iran, which is continuing to rain down ballistic missile fire over Israel, some of those including cluster munitions. And as I can tell you, the reaction from Israeli officials tonight to this ceasefire agreement is that they will abide by this agreement. They will also cease fire for the next 2 weeks alongside the United States as long as Iran keeps up its end of the bargain here. But Israeli officials are not pleased. We spoke with an Israeli source tonight who said that Israel is reluctantly agreeing to this ceasefire agreement. And they are doing so because, as Prime Minister Netanyahu told me several weeks ago, President Trump is the leader, Israel is the ally in this military campaign in Iran. But ultimately, Israeli officials felt like they still had more to achieve in Iran, more goals to achieve militarily through strikes, and also more targets that they could strike inside of Iran as well. But for the time being, we understand that Israel will abide by this ceasefire. Again, it is contingent on Iran doing so as well. And as we are witnessing right now, and as you're witnessing by my presence in this bomb shelter, in fact, we just heard a boom going off overhead, Iran is not yet abiding by the terms of this ceasefire. Interestingly, the Pakistani prime minister also said that this ceasefire agreement would include Lebanon, which presumably would halt Israeli military operations in southern Lebanon, Israeli airstrikes in the Lebanese capital of Beirut that we've been seeing over the course of the last few weeks, and Hezbollah attacks on northern and central Israel. That is also a big question mark, because Israeli officials, their understanding was that if a ceasefire was reached with Iran, they would likely intensify their operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon. This would very much change that equation. But again, we haven't yet officially heard from the Israeli government about this ceasefire agreement, about this inclusion of Lebanon, other than, again, what I'm hearing right now from an Israeli source.
All right, Jeremy Diamond, appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm joined now by CNN national security analyst Alex Politzis and retired U.S. Army Colonel Peter Mansour. Alex, you and I have been talking since before this began. Is this the outcome you expected?
Leading up to this point, the comments coming back about the Pakistan-led process were not great, that it was not really going anywhere, and then all of a sudden it started to gain traction over the last day or so, where there was a real push by the Pakistani Prime Minister to get this 2-week ceasefire into effect if the straits would open up. There was, I think, some warm sentiments earlier today, as how I would describe it. I heard from some Allied intelligence officials, also heard from some White House officials. It was trending in the right direction, and then it finally landed, about an hour before the deadline had hit. So, now in hearing Jeremy as well, I think he's 100% correct. But if we remember the last time as well, we've also completely decimated the Iranian command and control structure. So I imagine there's a chance that there could still be some sporadic missile fire coming in for a bit until all of the Iranian units are reached and told that the ceasefire is in fact in effect.
Their capabilities remain. I mean, they're able to shoot down U.S. planes. They're able to fire missiles into Israel.
Yeah, so what we're hearing is that the jet that was shot down the other day was brought down by a shoulder-fired missile. So the administration's been talking about air superiority and air dominance, which is taking out the fighter jets and then the surface-to-air missiles that are fired with the radar dishes that people are used to seeing in the movies. But there's also shoulder-fired ones, and the lower you fly to the ground, the greater the chance of that happening are. It's hard to get all of those.
Colonel Mansour, what are the odds this ceasefire holds for the full 2 weeks? And I guess more importantly, let's start big picture. If Iran has control through its armed forces over the next 2 weeks of the Strait of Hormuz, Does that then, whatever happens at the negotiating table, essentially give Iran de facto control moving forward? Because they didn't have that before.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's the big takeaway from this ceasefire is that for at least 2 weeks, and presumably going into the negotiations, Iran is in control of 20% of the world's oil supply and can exact tolls on shipping. It is an own goal of enormous proportions. You know, my PhD advisors, Al Millett and Williamson Murray, once wrote that mistakes in tactics and operations can be corrected, but miscalculations in policy and strategy live on forever. And I'm afraid that's the case here with the Trump administration and its war on Iran.
So is this what you get when you go into a war without really having a plan other than Jesus is going to protect us and protect our bullets and they're going to shoot straight and we're going to kill a lot of them?
It's what you get when you expect tactical and operational excellence to achieve strategic outcomes. And you don't think through the second, third order effects and the branches and sequels and what can happen if things go wrong. You know, the administration had 3 major goals: regime change, stop Iran from supporting its proxies around the Middle East, and destroy its nuclear program. None of them have been achieved. It's damaged and degraded their missile and drone capacity and destroyed their navy, but yet Iran still controls the Strait of Hormuz. So none of the strategic goals have been met, and they're unlikely to be met.
Alex, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, when all of the exercises have been done over the years for the Straits to prep the United States, it all was predicated upon taking out the missiles, the nuclear program, and it didn't begin with an existential threat to the regime in terms of taking out all that the major leaders in the decapitation strike at the beginning. So Iran immediately went into a position of an existential threat response, and through that, they were able to hold the Straits at risk. And for years, we've always talked about them mining the Straits or the naval, but now with the evolution of drone warfare over the last few years, particularly because of the war in Ukraine, they were able to do so without actually physically closing the Straits. They're open.
I mean, essentially, this has moved from a fight over Iran's nuclear program and the regime to concern over the Strait of Hormuz and getting oil through. I mean, that's where the administration's interest has shifted. We're not hearing them talk about concern over the nuclear capabilities of Iran anymore. It's all about opening up the Strait.
Yeah, we began with a statement that they were 2 weeks away from getting a weapon. In reality, it was about 2 weeks away if they had the enrichment technology from getting that 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium from 60 to 90%, just enough fuel for about 11 weapons. But then you still have to build a bomb, and that takes, a good bit of time afterwards. So if you pivot away from that to the other strategic threats, there was a clear plan, years of intelligence, about 16,000 targets for the missiles, the drones, the industrial base, the Navy, etc., which Central Command has been working through off of an air tasking order. And, there's about 3,000 or so targets left. They're not completely done. They wanted to be done with it, so they don't have to go back. But then there was mission creep. The Straits was not an original military objective. And then a transition of protesters isn't a military objective, it's a political one. The military can set the conditions for it, but with 1 million men at arms, you can bomb every headquarters in the entire country, and unless you get every AK-47, you have an unarmed population, and unless the security forces fall, it's difficult for them to take over.
And Colonel, it does seem now that the U.S. is dealing with an Iranian regime, which the president says there has been regime change because there's a lot of dead leaders and who have been replaced by new ones. There's a lot of reporting that the new ones may be more hardline, more extreme, have less reason to feel like they need to be moderate in any capacity. Do you think Iran now is a greater threat to the U.S.? Obviously, they've been severely, their capabilities have been degraded for how long we don't know. But in terms of the actual regime, the threat, does it remain to you?
In the near term, the regime has been severely degraded. There's no doubt about that. But in the long term now, if this ceasefire holds and ends up in some sort of negotiated settlement, that regime is going to be more hardline than what they replaced. And if they weren't working towards achieving a nuclear weapon before this, they certainly are now. They understand that their only way to survive will be to go the way of North Korea. And even if they become an international pariah, if they have nuclear weapons, they'll be left alone. And that's where we're headed.
Colonel Mansour, I appreciate your time. Alex Plitsis as well.